Our dearest Akua Nakupuna, we bow our heads at this time and we thank you for this wonderful opportunity to come here today to gather and to honor you, above all to honor Puako, which is who has brought us, what has brought us all together. We thank you for the hearts and minds that are here, for all the hohana that has happened throughout the years for this project, the knowledge and experience exchange. We're so grateful for that. We ask that you be upon us this evening, this afternoon, as we continue this knowledge and experience exchange, that we may be mindful of each other, have respect for one another, enjoy one another, and that we may uplift the love and light that Puako brings us in every facet of our lives that she touches, whether it be our work, our home, our recreational area. We do thank you for blessing us with Puako, and we ask that we do our part to malama her as she does us, and that we malama each one of us here and those that continue to come and go throughout today and throughout our lives, through the journey we have with Puako. We ask that if there's food here, that you bless it, it may nourish and strengthen our bodies, refreshments, keep us safe, and take us back to our various destinations after we're done here tonight safely. We lift all of this in your name, and we ask for your continued strength and guidance as we continue to move our community forward and our efforts forward. Mama Uano, Amen. The Clean Water for Reefs Puako project is very, very powerful. We do feel our connection and our kuleana to place, and we are definitely tied to this entire area.
There was a time when wastewater was not a problem. You know, my dad had a saying where he would always say, Kaui, there's no problem. People make problem.
Hawaii Island has some very unique hydrology. We have 3 active volcanoes, so the surface of half of the island is made up of this fractured rock. All of our water that comes as precipitation very quickly percolates into the soil and moves down into the groundwater. In Hawaii and on Hawaii Island, on-site sewage treatment like septic tanks or cesspools are the main way of treating sewage. All the sewage goes into the cesspool, and there's holes to allow the liquids to drain off. The fate of that sewage is then to the groundwater below. That groundwater then flows towards the ocean out to the shoreline. In some places, if you flush your toilet in the evening and you go for a swim in the morning, you're actually swimming in your own sewage.
Even in my short time of being here, 14 years or so, you have seen a decline in the fish population, and of course we had the big coral bleaching event last year, which you could see the dramatic effects of that.
Corals are an animal that has evolved to survive in an environment where you don't have an abundance of nutrients. And when you do begin to get more nutrients in the system, what happens is algae begin to grow. You begin to lose the coral, and when you lose the coral, you lose the fish, you lose the whole ecosystem.
There are signs of impaired coral health, and disease levels are actually linked or correlated with some of the nutrient levels that we're seeing. So in areas where you're seeing a lot of nutrients coming in, we're seeing higher levels of disease.
We understand that water quality is a huge issue, not only for the health of the corals, but also human health. We had a meeting one time with Drew Harvell from Cornell. It always stuck to me. She said, George, if Puako can't solve the problem of clean water, nobody can. I want to swim in clean water. I want my grandkids to swim in clean water.
This project means the reef is no longer neglected, that there is the exchange of they live that we may live.
whether it's the fish, whether it's, and excuse me, I get emotional, the limu, this papa, they all live that we live. And so for the reef to have the attention that it needs and it deserves, Puako for us, is just an acknowledgement that that connection has never been lost. She continues to provide for us in many ways, and it is our turn to step it up and give back.
So again, thank you all of you for being here today. Like I said, I know this is a very important matter to all of you. What we're going to do is, the purpose of today's meeting is, one, Puako has made a commitment to keep the community informed about what's going on the wastewater system. So today the purpose is also to update you on both the science as well as potential solutions. This is also an opportunity to provide the community. We've got government officials here who are going to be available on part of the panel discussion to answer questions that you may have. But the real purpose of today's meeting is really to talk about Puako. So I know that the issues of cesspools replacement has been in the paper for a while, and there may be others in the community who are interested about talking about their own issues. But if you don't mind, today we're going to focus on Puako. That is not to diminish in any way other people's concerns. So that's the purpose of today's meeting. The format of today's meeting is we're going to have Steve with the University of Hawaii Hilo is going to update us on the science. Joss is going to provide an update from Coral on the status of the program, funding resources, and then we're going to open into a panel discussion with the government officials. And we have been very fortunate that we have members of both the county and Representative Cindy Evans. I'd like to acknowledge that Representative Evans is here.
Hi there, I'm Steve Colbert from the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Before I get started, I wanted to acknowledge some of the other great science that's been done at Puako by the University of Cornell, UH Hilo, UH Manoa's Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, as well as the Nature Conservancy, who've all worked together here in Puako on projects together and independently to come up with all the great things that we know about Puako and its system. And today we're excited to share with you our findings of the work we've done at UH Hilo. So to get started, coral reefs are among the most biologically diverse and economically valuable ecosystems on Earth, providing hundreds of billions of dollars in food, jobs, recreational opportunities, coastal protection, and other valuable services. Puako's coral reefs are considered some of the richest in the state, but according to a recent Hawaii Department of Aquatic Resources report, Puako's reefs are in dire straits. The coral reefs over the last 30 years have decreased by about 30%, with algal cover increasing by about 38%. It's suspected that sewage pollution may be one of the contributing factors to these documented changes in Puako's reefs. Sewage pollution poses a threat to human and coral reef health, with the discharge of pathogens, nutrients, cleaning chemicals, hydrocarbons into nearshore waters. Human health effects from sewage range from abdominal infections to skin, urinary, and blood infections. Ecological effects of sewage pollution include shifts from coral to seaweed-dominated reefs, declines in coral and reef fish, as well as high occurrences of disease and infections of reef biota. The concerns of sewage pollution at Puako are not new. The residents have been worried about these impacts since the 1960s. As a result, in 1990, Puako was designated as a critical wastewater disposal area. These are areas where the disposal of wastewater has or may cause adverse effects on human health or the environment due to existing hydrogeologic conditions. You see, the sewage disposal systems in Puako are located really close to the water table. In some places, you have cesspools that are sitting in the water table. And other places where you have septic systems that have drainage fields that are just a few feet above the water table. In 2013, the Puako Community Association enlisted UH Hilo and the Nature Conservancy to help answer the questions, is sewage in Puako's water? And since then, we've been collecting information through several different research projects to address the question. And the answer is yes. How do we know this? Well, we've made measurements of sewage indicators, such as fecal indicator bacteria, stable nitrogen isotopes, and nutrients, as well as conducted dye tracer tests. From this research, we've shown that sewage is present and travels from homes to the shoreline in a matter of days, hours to days. And although we've documented this, many community members have asked us whether upslope communities or adjacent resorts may also be contributing to the sewage pollution at Puako's waters. Our most recent efforts have sought to answer this question and to address whether the type of sewage disposal system a property has matters with respect to nearshore water quality. So we sampled waters from groundwater wells up at Waikoloa Village, let's see, up here, as well as at the Manalani resorts. We sampled groundwater wells, and then we also collected shoreline samples from the resorts at the Mauna Kea Resort, the Puna Prince, the Manalani, and the Fairmont Orchid. Here is what we found. So let me get you oriented to this map, because the next few figures are all similar maps. Right here is the Puako shoreline going up to Hapuna, and then down here to the south we have the Manalani and the Fairmont Orchid. As you go Mauka, you can see this line of groundwater wells that we sampled and a few more groundwater wells that we sampled up at Waikoloa Village. Now the colors on all of these are going to be the same. Well, it's supposed to be green at the top there. It turns out a little black on here. But that green color is for good water quality, and then the warm colors of red and orange are signals of indicators of sewage present in the water. So the first slide here is showing Enterococcus, which is used by the Hawaii Department of Health as a water quality indicator. At a value of 35 units, there's a 3.6% chance of conducting gastroenteritis. There's another standard that's used by the state, a single sample standard of 104, and that's right where this line is. So anything in the light green and darker is above that single sample standard. And what you find is that as you go Mauka of Puako, there's good water quality. As you go to the resorts to the north, good water quality. To the resorts to the south, good water quality. But in Puako, we have this presence of this high abundance of this fecal indicator bacteria. Now, Enterococcus can grow in the soil, so it's not an ideal indicator. So the state also uses Clostridium perfringens. And again, what you find here is that the highest concentrations of Clostridium are found along the Puako shoreline, with low concentrations at the resorts to the north and to the south, and low concentrations in the groundwater, Mauka of Puako. Some of the stations, those that are red in color, are high enough to be indicative of non-point sources of pollution. In the last 10 years, more specific methods have been developed to identify fecal bacteria sources to waters. Specifically, molecular markers have been developed for the bacteria Bacteroides, which is the most abundant bacteria in the human gut. We now have methods that can identify bacteria of human origin in the water. The positive hits for human Bacteroides only occur in Puako. So, our first take-home message from this work, sewage indicator values were highest along the Puako shoreline, and the sewage is largely entering the water table at Puako and not at other locations. We're not seeing any of this material Mauka of Puako or to the north and to the south. So the source must be coming from Puako itself. The second question, does the type of sewage system matter? Do they leach into the water table? Do they differ in their time of travel from the home to the shoreline? We've now tested how fast water travels to the shoreline from cesspools, ATUs, and septic tanks. Our dye tracer studies documented dye reaching the shoreline in less than 5 hours, up to 10 days. Both the shortest and the longest travel time came from homes with ATUs. The other thing is that all three of these systems, cesspools, septic tanks, and ATUs, all had examples where dye reached the shoreline in less than 12 hours.
What are ATUs?
Huh?
What are ATUs?
You need to define the ATU.
ATU stands for aerobic treatment units. Aerobic treatment units. So it's a specialized type of septic tank. Thank you. So how is this so? Some of this had to do with how far the sewage system was from the shoreline, and that there were longer transit times for homes that had septic systems farther away from the shoreline. But that wasn't the only explanation. The other factor had to do with the geology of where the system was placed. In some areas, there are a greater number of fractures in the rocks that likely allow the dye to reach the water table faster than others. In some places, there are likely smaller fractures, and the water table is farther away from the system, allowing for longer travel times to the shoreline. We also assessed water quality in front of homes with different types of on-site disposal systems. We found that water quality was similar in front of all the homes where we sampled, regardless of the system type. For example, Enterococcus was similar in front of homes with different on-site disposal systems, and concentrations were greater than the Hawaii Department of Health single sample maximum. A similar pattern was observed for nutrients too. Here's an example of for total dissolved nitrogen, and what we found, the concentrations were all greater than 100 micromolar. So to wrap it up, what we found is that sewage indicator values are all greatest along the Puako shoreline, that the dye from sewage systems reached the shoreline in a matter of hours, up to 10 days, and that there was no difference in this type of system, whether it was an ATU, a septic tank, or a cesspool, in terms of how fast the water reached the shoreline, or in terms of the water quality that we found at the shoreline there. So in conclusion, it's paramount to minimize the land-based pollution for human and coral reef health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. If you have any questions, we're going to hold them to the end. We're going to let Josh do her presentation.
Well, great to see you all here today. Thank you so much for coming and taking time out of your busy schedules, and for some of you, your vacations, to be here and talk about wastewater. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you an update on the Clean Water for Reefs Puako project, and also talk a little bit about what might be on some people's minds, which is about how to make this wastewater treatment solution financially feasible for homeowners. And I'm going to tell you why I believe we can do that. So I work for the Coral Reef Alliance, and our mission is uniting communities to save coral reefs. And we work with communities around the world to help them think through how they can live in harmony with reefs, whether it be to do with fisheries or water quality or other issues. And so the Puako community invited Coral to facilitate this collaborative project to help you understand and think through what are the wastewater treatment options available to you so that you can make a decision on how to proceed. And the reason why coral is so attracted to work at Puako is in part the opportunity to protect this really important reef, but also because the community here is so dedicated and motivated to do so. And that's shown here by this huge turnout today. So thank you. So on this slide, I just wanted to acknowledge the number of collaborators that are on this project. Represented here are members of the Clean Water for Reefs Puako Advisory Committee who guide this project, as well as a number of other collaborators and consultants that provide technical information, some of which I'll present to you today. In the past year, we've also been working really closely with a number of officials and representatives from the county and state government, and some of these individuals are with us today. And after my presentation, you'll get a chance to ask some of the questions that you have about how they've been working with us to help solve this challenge and think through how we can solve this wastewater challenge for Puako. So before we move to the future, I just want to take a moment to walk through some of the steps that got us here today. So the first step for this project was to figure out what is the best solution for Puako. And we hired Aqua Engineering to do a feasibility study looking at three different solutions, three different options. On the right here is the ATUs, the aerobic treatment units, as one option. Another was to connect to the Malalanis treatment facility, and a third to build the on-site treatment facility in Puako. Aqua found in their study that the on-site treatment facility scored highest with criteria to do with environmental benefit, as well as the long-term cost to the community. And so the on-site treatment facility is the only solution that enables the wastewater to be treated to the highest standard, the R1 standard, and enables the effluent to be disposed of away from the shoreline, which eliminates nearly all the residential sewage pollution from Puako. As I mentioned, it's the least costly of all the options that were looked at over a long term as compared to the other options over a 40-year life cycle. And so the solution not only lasts 40 years, but into the long term, providing a solution to safeguard Puako for future generations. So the COIF Alliance, the advisory committee for this project, as well as the PCA, all recommended that the on-site treatment facility to the community were all in agreement that this was the best option. So the next step was to investigate how would this be implemented and what would it cost. And so last year we identified that the best way to finance such a facility would be to establish a community facilities district through Chapter 32. And this would enable the cost to be spread across the whole community, enable a sustainable finance plan for the facility that will enable the smooth running of this facility into the long term. And so we hired Web Associates to do a rates analysis so that we could estimate how much is this going to cost homeowners, because we know that that's what you really wanted to know. And so the rates analysis essentially used a USDA 40-year loan. The current interest rates were a little above 2, but we decided to be very conservative because we wanted to provide you with a worst-case scenario. So we used a 3.5 and a 4.5% range. And we assumed also, as a worst-case scenario, that the community would bear the whole cost of the facility. And so we assumed the loan be taken out to pay for the capital infrastructure costs, as well as development land permits, which all amounted to $14.5 million as an estimate. And so there's two costs with this analysis. One is the facility rate, which is the debt service on a loan that's used to pay for the capital infrastructure and development, plus other costs to replace capital infrastructure, enabling the smooth running of the facility into the long term. And so all the homes would pay, all of the lots would pay the facility rate, and the amount is dependent on the size of the home. The second cost is the operations and maintenance cost, and that's a flat $1,200 fee across every developed lot in Puako and Wailea Bay. And so this is the table that we showed you this time last year. And on the left are 6 home size categories, plus the undeveloped lot. Oops, keep doing that. And on the right are the total annual cost, which is the facilities rate plus the O&M. And the range here represents the interest rates, 3.5 to 4.5%. So last year we acknowledged that this is high. And we know that this, is a little frightening and unsettling to some people. And so the next step was, for the project, was for us to do a lot of engagement in the community and ask you what you think. And so over this past year, we did a survey as well as a lot of phone calls and in-person engagement in the community. And we got feedback from 68% of TMK lot owners. And we asked 3 questions. We asked a few more, but essentially we wanted to know 3 things. Do you support moving forwards with the recommended solution, the on-site treatment facility? Is it financially feasible to you? And then third, if it's not, what would be the price that you could pay? And so what we learned is that 43% of TMK lot owners do support moving forwards with the facility. So that's about 2/3 of the lot owners that we got feedback from. We learned that bearing the full cost of this facility is not financially feasible for everybody. And we learned that it does become financially feasible at about $1,500 a year.
I know that you want to put off the questions for later, but since you're talking about money, one cost that it's not clear to me that's in here is hooking one house up to the line.
All of it is included. Everything's included. The connection to the facility and building facility. Yeah, this is everything.
So the remodeling of
That's right.
the yard.
That's right. Everything's included. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So with advice from the PCA, we used that $1,500 figure and asked Webb Associates to redo the rates analysis, assuming that the first 2 tiers of home sizes would pay $1,500. And so assuming that this new table is much more easily digested and is financially feasible to homeowners, then we're able to figure out how much money do we need to raise to get here. And so the answer is that we need to reduce costs. Reduce costs will raise $11 million. So I'm going to pause. Because I can imagine that some people are thinking, oh goodness, we're not going to do that. Or, that's going to be really hard. I just want to acknowledge that. And so instead of just moving straight forward, I want to just acknowledge this is the next mountain to climb. But we've actually come a long way already. We've done a lot of work with this project. We've figured out a lot of stuff. We've identified the problem, and so you just heard from Steve and the research that he and his colleagues have done, identifying that the sewage pollution is coming from the cesspools and leaky septic tanks, and we just heard that ATUs, aerobic treatment units, are also not a great solution for the whole community. We've identified a solution that's technically feasible, that can solve the environmental health problem, and the state government recently set a goal to replace all cesspools in the state by 2050. And a few weeks ago, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this, but the Department of Health released a report that highlighted 14 priority areas across the state for this cesspool replacement, and Puako is one of those, based on the sensitive waters, which includes your coral reef. And so the next step for the Department of Health, as we understand, is to do some engagement and figure out what our next steps. But there's a really good opportunity now for us to share all of the information that we've learned about what the solution is, what it's going to cost, and what we need to do to implement it with the government. So we've identified an implementation pathway for the solution. Ensure there are some details that we need to figure out, and we're working really closely with the county to work through some of these details. So we've been really fortunate to have that collaboration. We know what it's going to cost, at least a worst case scenario, right? And we know that sufficient homeowner support exists as long as we can reduce those costs. And so, yeah, there's a mountain to climb, but I just want to let you know that I think we can do it. And one of the reasons why I think we can do it is because other communities have. We took a look at a few other communities around the country who've done the same thing, transitioned from to more appropriate wastewater technology. And I just wanted to highlight one of the examples here for you today, the community of Rincon in Southern California. Has some similarities to Puako. It's 130 homes. It's about half the size. They had septic leach fields that did not function, and so sewage was leaching into the groundwater and then straight into the ocean, which was making surface sick. And the community invested in an engineering report that identified that the community needed to be sewered and connected to a treatment facility. And in this case, there was one that already existed. And they succeeded to raise $4 million from the county and state governments in California. And it took dedication, it took multiple years of problem solving and collaboration, but they did it. Right. So back to Puako. How can we reduce these costs by $11 million? Well, there are some investigations and some potential solutions that we've looked at already, and then there's more work to be done. There's more investigation to be done, and that's really the next stage for this project. That's the next focus, the main focus that we're going to work on. So we've looked at reducing costs through spreading the cost across other users through public-private partnerships. And so we have 3 options that we've been looking at. First, with the proposed marine lab in Puako, the proposed Hapuna Park system, as well as the Wailea Park system. And so we're still exploring these options. With the Hapuna Park system, that could reduce these costs by somewhere in the ballpark of 3, maybe a little more, million. With the Wailea Beach Park, that could shave off about $500,000. We've been approached by a number of different private companies as well through the course of this project that think there might be an opportunity for them to own and operate a facility, and potentially, if they can figure out how to increase the user base in the future, that may be ways to reduce the cost. We're not clear of a clear pathway to do this yet, but we're keeping them, the option on the table. We'll continue to speak with companies that approach us.
Are there any bidders on that at all?
Sorry?
Are there any private companies that have shown any interest in that?
There's been a couple that we've been speaking to through the course of the project, yeah. But, as I said, there seem to be a lot of challenges, so I don't want to say, oh, that looks like really promising, but we'll continue to speak with them. Keep it on the table. The loan that we used to do the original rates analysis was a 40-year USDA loan, and at the time that seemed the best option for Puako. And we used a conservative 3.5% interest rate, but since that time we've been speaking with the Department of Health, and we've learned that there's a potential for Puako to be able to access a less than 2% state revolving fund loan over a 30-year term. We haven't done solid analyses and all this, but estimate that could shave about $500,000 off this cost also. There's a lot of low interest loans that the community could be eligible for, and I'm just showing you what seems to be the best option. There's also the potential for community improvement projects through the county, and we've been talking with the county about whether the community could have those allocated to them or not. We're not sure about any financial impact, but these conversations are happening. There's also the $10,000 tax credit for replacing cesspools. 53 homes in Puako are currently eligible for that, and that could save about $450 off the facilities rate per year if homeowners are able to put a $10,000 towards the capital build cost up front and then get that saving back. House Bill 602 could make every home with cesspools eligible for this. So if we could shave a few million off with those, we still need to shave more off. And so other options are grants and donations. So we've got options with private, so foundations, individual donations, corporations, as well as looking at options with the government, at all levels of the government. And so I think it's important just to acknowledge here right now that the Puako community in aggregate have already invested a lot of funding into first identifying this problem and in working towards solving this problem. And I think we all acknowledge that the community can't bear the financial cost of solving this problem alone. So I want to acknowledge that up front. And so, I think this solution is about collaboratively working together with everyone, community, broader community, government, to solve this problem. And so in terms of opportunities with the government, there's a few here. There's potential wastewater transition grants. There are, the majority that we've looked at, the community's not eligible for, but, understand there may be those that they are. There's environmental grants, potentially state budgets, or grants and aid. But just as I close here, we're going to have a number of individuals from the county and Representative Evans here on the panel, and so you can ask your questions about what they're able to do, what they're doing to help work through solving this problem with you. So I'm just going to close saying thank you again for coming, for your dedication and commitment with this project, and just highlight again that I think if we work together, I think we can do this. So thank you.
We'll take a couple of questions, and then we'll go into the presentation. Yes, maybe?
This on-site treatment facility, to what level of treatment are you going to, and what is your disposal methods for the effluent?
The plan is R1. I'll let Erica speak to the
primary, secondary,
tertiary.
tertiary.
So it's tertiary treatment, and what's been proposed in the preliminary engineering report is for primary discharge would be above ground irrigation, which would require about 7 to 8 acres, depending on that user base that Joss went over. And then there would also be, the secondary discharge would be below ground discharge, since you're able to do that with R1 water.
Would it be possible for the homeowners to tie in for irrigation for themselves and save some water?
It would be possible with additional infrastructure, so capital improvement or capital costs would raise with that additional piping and sewering to go back to the residential homes. So there's conversations that maybe could happen in the future, but again, that would raise capital infrastructure costs to be able to do so. But I'm. Are you sure?
Yeah. I have a question. When are you going to put this thing out to bid so we have a real world number on how much it's going to cost?
That's an excellent question. And maybe, I don't think we're that close yet. I don't think we have a solution yet, but what we do have is the next group, we've got a panel discussion of government officials who will at least share with you, and you will have the opportunity to ask them some questions about what's realistic. I'm going to take just a couple more questions because I know you really want to hear the panel. Yes?
In regards to what was printed on the program here, the problem has been determined, okay? And that one slide said that you checked, 5 cesspools, 3 ATUs. To me, there's not enough data, okay, to actually determine that. And I think there's a wild card here that isn't being considered, okay? You're saying this is a 40-year program, 2 wild cards, okay? It's a 40-year program. Well, they're building a transit unit over on Oahu, and I don't know how many billions of dollars over that is, okay? They may never complete it, okay? We just watched a program on the Galapagos the other day. In the last 10 years in the Galapagos, 9 coral reefs have died, okay? I've had property over here 20 years. Less people live in this neighborhood today than lived 20 years ago. Most of the ocean properties, no one even lives in them except for 1 month a year, okay? I was out of the water for 6 months, and then I had to be back in. I've got 250 scuba dives out there. I've got over 1,000 snorkels, and 2 years ago, the water heated up. A third of that reef died in that period, okay? And what about the Great Barrier Reef? A third of that died a few years ago, okay? 40 years from now, okay? This whole reef can be dead in the next 10 years just from the water temperature increase, okay? So I don't really think you did prove in your program there, from your sampling, that there is a serious problem, okay? And secondly, over a 40-year period, I don't believe you can come up with those numbers from reality, okay? I don't follow it. I really don't. And I've been to meetings before where this group has said the majority of this community is for a sewer system, okay? And what it ended up was they had 35 responses, okay? 18 of them said, yes, we'd like a new sewer system. 17 didn't. And then this organization told me it was the majority. Okay. So I have a little problems with some of the facts that are presented.
And if I can kind of interject, I think that's a fair question. I also think that there's a Department of Health report that's just recently come out, and I would urge you to take a copy of that. I think today's discussion was really intended to looking at, based upon the information that they've got, what are the solutions? But I think your question is a valid one, and I'm assuming that Carl is going to go back, and perhaps they have to, and working with Steve and coming up with putting on the website more definitive information to raise your level of comfort that they have explored all of the information. But I'm going to take 2 more questions so that we can really get to the panel. I'm going to take, yes, you, and then your gentleman. Go, yes?
It's not a question as much as in 1976, my late husband and I bought property on the Oregon coast in Nestwin, Oregon. And we haven't had a very similar situation. We don't have coral there. But it needed a septic system, and it is so much like Puako. You can't believe it, although it has more streets going back from it. But a lot of the oceanfront properties are just about the same as what we have in Puako. And they did put the system through. It goes, our house is shared. There's a tank that it pumps into for 2 houses. Other areas have 3 houses, smaller houses. And the price that we've been paying since then, and I don't know how long, at least 20 years I would say, is $150 a month that we pay on that. So it's very close to what the number that you first mentioned here. It would be about $1,800 a year that we're actually financing. And it might, I don't know if you would have the interest of contacting the Nestwin sanitation and how they have handled it, because it's eventually all pumped into a big open holding tank, which has been no problem, really.
Appreciate your comment.
Can I make one comment really fast? So, hopefully today we can try, as Don has been mentioning, to be able to utilize the county and representatives that we have here today visiting us to be able to ask them questions and get answers that maybe only they can actually reply to. If you have direct program questions regarding maybe some of the slides that you saw from Coral, or whether you have questions in regards to the research that Steve presented, and maybe would like to talk a little bit more about that, there's a couple of ways that you could do that today. One is by filling out the evaluation form, and we will absolutely get back to everybody that has questions on that evaluation form. And there's also cards, 3x5 cards that are in the back. If you have program questions or science questions that you want to write on those cards, we will also go through those and then be able to get back in touch with folks. So if you just make sure if it's on a card, to make sure put a contact name or a number or email address as to how we can reach you. And then there's a third opportunity, which is for the private reception for the Puako homeowners after this event, where all of the folks that we've brought here today will be mingling out there. So please, make sure to ask those questions as well.
I'm going to take one question, but I do want to ask the group. We've got the government officials here. The purpose of today's meeting was to have that panel discussion. But if you want to continue to ask questions, or do you want to get into the panel discussion? Panel discussion? So I'm going to take one more question, and this gentleman, I said I would take your question. Go ahead.
I've been in Puako for 10 years. My business back in California for 30 years was being a municipal financial advisor. I've done a whole bunch of assessment districts. When you don't get a response, that's almost 100% no votes.
Yeah.
They had 68%, in my experience, and I've done, like I said, a whole lot of assessment districts. that if you get 5% of that 32% to vote yes, that's a great outcome. So when you look at that and say 68 and 43 and different numbers, I think that's a very optimistic thing. Now, the question I have, which maybe the panel will be able to answer as a lead-off, in order to do any of the kind of things we're talking about, does it require a vote of the landowners?
That's an excellent question and a great segue as we go into the path, because that's going to be the first question. So if you don't mind, and I know some of you still have questions, they will, as Erica said, there's other opportunities to pose your questions. This is not the end of the conversation. Obviously, you guys have been doing this for years, and this is a mounting problem for you. I think you should all be applauded for the work that you've done. But we want to take advantage of the government officials that are here. So I'm going to ask them to come up to the stage, and I will introduce them as they're walking up so that that will help facilitate the time. We actually have Bill Krachowski. He is the director of the Department of Environmental Management. And next to Bill is going to be Roy Takemoto, who's the executive assistant to Mayor Harry Kim. Next to Roy is Deanna Sacco. She is the director of the Department of Finance. And at the end of the table is Representative Cindy Evans, who represents the 7th District from North Conus, North Kohala, and South Kohala. So we're going to start off by giving each of the panel members an opportunity to briefly make a statement, and then we're going to go into the questions. I've taken down, those of you who have asked that you wanted to make the question, pose a question, I've got your requests here, so I'll take you in the order that they've been presented. So with that, Bill, if you can start us off.